Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook Live and Twitter. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, equity in the cannabis industry. 11 states, including Massachusetts, have legalized marijuana, opening up business opportunities in product production and sales. Communities of color were disproportionately impacted by past drug policies and have long argued that they should benefit from the fast-growing trade. Here in the state, the social equity and economic empowerment programs are aimed at helping companies gain a foothold. But with rare exception, entrepreneurs of color have made little headway, blocked by lack of access to funds and by mandatory government approvals. What will it take for them finally to gain a seat at the table, and what is the status of efforts by African American entrepreneurs here in Massachusetts? Joining me tonight, Chauncey Spencer, founder of High Tech Farms. He is also an economic empowerment applicant. Cynthia Mompoint is an economic empowerment applicant and the co-founder of Danbala Group, along with her husband, Morris Stringer. Tito Jackson, CEO of Verdant Medical, a vertically integrated recreational marijuana organization that plans stores in Boston, Provincetown, and a store and cultivation facility in Rowley, Massachusetts. And Richard Harding, co-founder of Real Action for Cannabis Equity, or RACE, and president of the Green Soul Foundation. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but is it true that the four of you pretty much represent the complete advancement of folks of color and African Americans specifically in the cannabis industry? Are we looking at just the four of you?
No, I think there's a significantly larger population who are attempting to get into the industry, but the real issue are the barriers to entry, and the biggest barrier to entry is access to capital.
Okay, so that's attempting to get in. I'm suggesting that the four of you may be the only ones that have moved forward in some way. Am I exaggerating?
There are several others.
Okay.
Not several, excuse me, a couple others. There's,
Okay.
take for instance, Kobe Evans, who's doing Pure Oasis in Grove Hall. He's moved forward, and there's another group that opened up they have a location in Mattapan further down. They just received a host agreement, and that's I guess it's Mojos, yes, correct.
Okay, so we're saying less than 10 though, Richard.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
look, we're not the whole group, but we represent the small sliver that seem to be able to sort of begin to poke at that sort of glass ceiling around cannabis. There is not equity throughout the state, as we see. There's no recreational shops open right now in Boston or Somerville or Cambridge, and that's part of the problem. And I think Tito was right that the access to capital, access to siting, the regulatory process, which is long and arduous, as well as the upfront cost to maintain a space while you go through the process is very, very hard. And we need to figure out how to band together to support each other in the quest to become viable black entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color representing the social equity and economic empowerment groups that the state has aspired to support.
Well, you pretty much, Richard, think that big companies have a baked-in advantage.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the first mover advantage in this business is big. I think in some cases where you have the medical establishments who are connected to big cannabis, who have already been in the business selling product, having a vertically integrated company, I think that in many cases you need to make sure that economic empowerment groups have that same sort of footing in that same backing as they begin to build their business. In Cambridge, it was an interesting situation where you had some medicals who had already been established in terms of the rollout. And so they were going to give, I believe, 8 licenses out. You already had 5 established medicals that wanted to transfer their license to adult use. So you began the system inequitably. You know, you just didn't have the equitable rollout that you're looking for. And so at RACE, we're looking at being advocates and fighting for equity across the board, particularly around the one-to-one rollout and other tools like moratoriums and other things that can help economic empowerment groups get a real footing in this business.
Okay, so as an economic empowerment applicant, Cynthia, having to have the kind of cash you have to have on hand to just sort of hang in there while the process goes, because all of you have talked about the cumbersome process. And part of that is just the process. And the other part of it, it seems to me, is the process facing folks of color trying to go through it.
Absolutely. So for all of us, we represent different stages of it. And for the Dambala Group ourselves, we are still in the process of raising the capital necessary for us to fully acquire our location, and then the capital for the startup costs and moving forward with our application to the state. That's the biggest challenge that we're facing. And in terms of representing the other folks, economic empowerment folks, we're not the total, but we represent just a small handful who have been able to eke out a little bit of headway towards that goal. There's so many more that we need to turn around and help back once we are able to accomplish that, and getting that capital will allow us to do that.
Yeah, and you'll see them at the City Hall meetings. They'll be cheering us on or cheering other folks on. We're supporting one another to lobby for more favorable laws and ordinances, and we are getting a lot of pushback from some of the corporations that are trying to come into space. Out-of-state corporations are trying to come into this space, and so we do need to band together, like Richard and Cynthia says. We need to come together and make our voice known and carve out a space specifically for us, specifically for economic empowerment applicants, so that we can not just be successful, but actually, yes, to be successful.
Well, you would give the state and those programs a C right now in terms of effectiveness.
I would give them a D.
Okay.
Yes, I would definitely give them a D. There's a lot more that they need to do. We do need set aside specifically for economic empowerment applicants. We need that done at the state level, actually, and we do need capital. We do need also policies and procedures to be put in place that are supportive of us on a municipal level too. And so, we do need a significant amount of assistance, but that's not been given.
And I think so. I'm a medical license holder also, and I think one of the things, and my take on the Cambridge piece, it might be a little bit different. I personally think there was a missed opportunity there around the financial resources that were actually on the table. There were several $1 million that were actually on the table for essentially large companies that would actually grant money to smaller companies. And so I think what ended up happening there, and I think from a business perspective, I think it's absolutely critical that the financial resources, in particular of large companies, are actually transferred over and actually put on the table, so some of the smaller companies are actually able to move forward. Sadly today, there is now a lawsuit
The Revolution clinics
in Cambridge, the thing that hurts me the most, and I don't know about y'all, the first of the month is a difficult time, because the first of the month is when my landlord, that I don't actually already occupy these locations, they actually, because we're still in this process and I haven't taken control, I'm paying what we refer to as a hold fee.
Right.
And that's several $1,000s a month to a place I can't lay my head or actually even open. So I guess the question is, and I would love to kind of hear from folks here, is that how do we do this in a way where we actually introduce the issue of equity, which is the most important component around the access side, but the economic components. It's about, I would estimate, about $1 million at least to open a store. And so I think that component is one of the largest hurdles that we have. White families are worth $247,500 in the city of Boston. Black families are worth $8. $1 million is a lot of $8.
Okay, I just wanted to ask this question before you go on, and which is, you're assuming that for everybody, equity is important.
Exactly. Can I chime in on that?
Right.
So what I'd say is, and I think Tito squarely put it, I think we disagree about this, mainly because of the principle. You just said that if it takes about $1 million to run a store, in the scenario in Cambridge, and I deemed the amendment, the slave amendment, negotiated by the slave masters, particularly because I thought that it was going to leave economic empowerment groups indentured in a place where they were not going to be able to survive.
Absolutely.
Just to be clear, what the ordinance did was push to the top folks who would be considered
what it did was it would
yeah.
have allowed in 3 months or January these medicals to switch their license to recreational license for a small dollar amount, which started at $250,000, then ended somewhere at $500,000 with a total package of $7.5 million or so. The problem you had, Callie, was that not only was it not enough money to make sure an EE group was successful, it also was going to be given to us in increments. So you weren't just giving us the money, you were given 250 now, 500 later. Never was it ever, in my opinion, an honest negotiation that would have let economic empowerment applicants access the capital necessary to be successful. There's one thing to say we're going to give you money. There's one thing to say we're going to support you being successful. And we didn't feel like that was the case and that there was ever a good faith negotiation going on. We sat down with the municipal officials over there and told them exactly what it cost, and every single time they undercut us. So equity is real. The fact that one of these, like the money is in the license. One of these licenses worth so much money that they were, the greed and the arrogance stopped them from negotiating with us in good faith. And so that's why we won with the resounding voice of the City Council 7-2, and we believe that we'll prevail in this lawsuit.
But
So let me just also put on the table, and because there's a lot of this stuff is in the news, and I know people like me are thinking, where does this all fit?
Right.
One of the things that you have to do to get your actual real facility, whatever it's going to be, is get a community
Host agreement. Yep.
agreement.
Yes.
You have one for Fitchburg, but it's extremely difficult to get. And
Yep.
so people are asking the question based on what happened in Fall River with Mayor Jaisal Correa, who has been charged, has not been proven, but has been charged with offering kickbacks and accepting a quid pro quo situation in which if you paid him a certain amount of money, then you could get your community host agreement, and therefore you'd be on your way to get your facility. Now, a lot of folks saw that story and said, oh, well, that's happening everywhere. This just got exposed. Most people feel like...
I think the predatory nature of this business is that that's going to happen. The key is, and I know Chauncey, and I'm sure Cynthia's going to do this, is that, look, we're approached all the time by big companies saying that we want to, take control over your company. This has happened plenty of times with the players all across the state, and even in the Cambridge situation. You have to stand up and bet on yourself, and that's what I think we're all doing. We're betting on ourselves, looking at the long game. But there's no doubt, and this has been highlighted in the Globe, that the predatory nature of the big cannabis companies is real.
Cynthia, you want to weigh in?
On several points. So with respect to the host community agreements, I think as you've demonstrated, it's a matter of to move forward, finding the communities where they are open and welcoming and highlighting the fact that they want to support economic empowerment applicants and promote social equity in Massachusetts. So that's one of the things that we can definitely focus on. And then also to add to the conversation about what it is that we do in terms of dealing with big business, it's important that we recognize the money is necessary, and the gatekeepers, they have the money. So there are several things that we can do. Sit at the table and lay out the terms as you've described. I think the timing as to when those terms were laid out in Cambridge was a little bit late. These are conversations, if the dispensaries want to have those, or if anyone in the big business arena wants to have those conversations, they need to be had early on before they get to the level of the city council or the planning board. And that way, that allows everyone to come to the table on an equal playing field. We're supposed to maintain 51% ownership, and that needs to be honored at every juncture of the process. And so I think at one point, Tito, there was a conversation about one of the companies that you were familiar with and working with who were willing to provide money to support economic empowerment applicants without any other strings attached. And that's very powerful. That's something that would allow economic empowerment applicants to go ahead and move forward with their projects, and then they can face the next hurdle of the host community agreement.
But I felt that it was, from what I heard, I understood that those types of loans were not necessarily no strings attached. I heard they were a little bit more onerous, and that's what we've been dealing with in this space. A lot of the times these larger companies will come in and they'll just say, well, we'll give you money, we'll do your build out, we'll give you software, but we're going to put people on your board, and then we're going to run the show, and you're just going to be basically a token. And so that's the type of offers that we've been receiving from day one. And that's something that we don't want to have.
So would you address in your answer to why it is important for folks to maintain ownership in your company?
So we need to understand there's kind of two chunks of this. One is called equity, which is actually the ownership that you have. And then potentially there's a debt component. Or actually in the Cambridge side, it was actually a grant side. that wouldn't dilute your equity. So this issue is really about, as Chauncey just brought up, the issue of control. If you don't have 51% or more in controlling your company, what ends up happening when decisions about where you want to be, how you want to operate, who you want to hire. I've set aside 20% of our jobs for folks who have Corys. Well, you know what? If someone has 60% of
people with past records.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
So if someone has 60% of my company, they can then trump me on that. Actually, well,
Why
I'm
is
not
it
even going to use that
particularly
term.
important, what I'm trying to get to, for African Americans
Oh.
to be in charge of?
No, so
Yeah.
we have to own in this space. We are by the way, we are actually, when we understand this industry before a year ago was the Black and Latino community, the cannabis industry, right? So, and we're in meetings now where people are saying, well, how do we deal with issues like delivery? Well, you know what, delivery existed a long time before your really nice suit wearing self came into this room. We have to own in this space also because our brothers and sisters went to jail in the state of Massachusetts between 2008, yes, 2008 to 2014. We had a 300% higher chance of going to jail for possession, which was then legal, and an over 700% higher chance of going to jail for distribution. We have to be in this space for the real issue of reparations. And we get to decide who works in our companies, who we even buy from, who cleans the space. And then when we make, hopefully, the millions of dollars, we get to reinvest those dollars back in our neighborhoods and communities. And that's what equity has to be about in this space.
But the question is about
Let me
ownership.
also ask
though.
about the consequences in some that are already shown evidence in places where there are, because there's no place really where there's equity right now in this trade, even in all the rest of the states, where the arrests for marijuana of black folk have gone up even while this industry has become legal. That seems crazy.
You know, Kelly, it not only does it seem crazy, it is crazy. The stark reality is that, you know, you can't avoid racism and classism in this argument. You know, look, I don't know that everybody that's on the law enforcement side is with the fact and understanding that cannabis is here to stay and that it's legal. We know that. And so what happens is, like anything else, if you find a young black individual, let's say on Blue Hill Ave or in Codman Square, wherever, and you decide that you want to say it's not possession, it's possession with intent, immediately the game changes. And so, you know, just because cannabis is now legalized, I don't think that any of us can say that, you know, the rest of life is going to be fair. And so this is why equity is so important in that, in my opinion, sometimes it has to be not only fought for, but legislated. They don't give us anything. I don't know that any of the mostly white, rich people, more than likely from out of state, you know, businessmen, care about whether or not black and brown kids in Boston and Cambridge and Massachusetts have a real opportunity in the emerging cannabis business. And so it's incumbent upon us to do our part. Tito talks about hiring. You know, one of the greatest things about ownership is that you control, you're your own boss. And I think that's most important. And the ancillary businesses that come along with cannabis, it's not just about the stores or the cultivation. You have delivery, you have packaging. There's a lot of opportunity, and we need to seize the opportunity now for communities of color who've been marginalized by the fake war on drugs.
Let me also introduce or get you all from a African American perspective to talk about stigma, because many of you have said that particularly older generations of African Americans are like, listen, I get that it's an industry, I get that it's something that can offer job opportunities, but I've seen what it did. You know, I know people who went to jail and are still going to jail. Why, you know, I don't understand why you all want to be involved in it. Respond.
Well, it's to the point that you started to share, Richard, which is, and it actually goes beyond the racism and addressing the issues in our community. Here it is, we have an industry that we have the potential to have ownership and leadership in, and there is no other industry where you see us represented in this capacity. And so in that, it positions us to go ahead and turn around and then show to our folks that, yes, we understand the trauma that was instilled upon this war against us starting in the 90s, or actually prior to that, but really taking hold in the 90s. We understand that folks are still being deported. It's a deported, and we have high immigrant populations here in Massachusetts. So of course they're like, I'm staying away from that. I worked too hard to get here. Folks can't get jobs because of the records that are tied to it, unable to go to college. So the damage is so deep and ingrained in them that when we sit here and say, well, here's the opportunity to make money from this. It's going to take
Can't make
a
the
lot
shift.
of work.
False flag.
It's going to it's going to take a lot. And then, as you said earlier, when they look across the rest of the country, and even what happened in Massachusetts after possession became legal, folks were still getting arrested. So there's a disconnect there.
Absolutely.
And until we come together and really educate and become voices that are very powerful at the table, if not building our own table, maybe we'll get to that conversation.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do in order to start to chip away at the stigma that's really strong.
Yeah, it requires education. It requires also advocacy and different types of advocacy, not just for recreational, but also for medicinal. And people need to understand that the plant is a medicine, and it's a medicine that people use recreationally also. And so having to spend a lot of time and advocate and educate is definitely part of this. And I see the changes in perception amongst other older folks, and it takes maybe about a half an hour or so of talking with them that they eventually say, hey, yeah, I used to smoke, and they understand. It's all the time. They eventually get there, but I believe that it just takes time, and we're going to get there.
I went and spoke to Mass Senior Action, which is an amazing group of elders in our community. They asked me to come speak about the cannabis industry, and I got there, and I was in the basement of a church, which just felt a little bit weird. But what we actually ended up doing a poll in the beginning. Only about 50% of people supported it. We went through the legislative components that we actually decided this in 2016. And now the question is not whether or not we're going to do it, is who is going to be in the store down the street from me. Is it going to be the person from California? Is it going to be the person from Washington State? Is it going to be the person from Oregon? Or is it going to be your neighbor who has this opportunity? The other pieces, I had them raise their hands. How many of your grandchildren have had arrests or stops based on the majority of people there actually raise their hand at the end? And as Chauncey just brought up, when we have a real conversation, people, one from the CBD side, from the pain relief side,
From the oil side.
and my
Yeah,
mind
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
tell,
right. Yes,
Rosa
yes.
Jackson, a close relative of mine, my mom,
Yeah.
called me yesterday with like, when you come back here, because I need some more of that CBD, right? So there is healing here that is not related to opioids.
Yes.
So knowing that there's usually a 25% reduction of fatal opioid overdoses when there's a recreational marijuana in that space, usually a 10% reduction in crime. Because it turns out, oftentimes, you hire folks who are ex-law enforcement. People don't particularly want to hang around and do bad stuff right in front of them. So I think there's an opportunity having these conversations, and most of our elders have partaken at some point. After a couple of people came and whispered, like, I put it in my salad, or I make some cookies. I was like, well, how come you didn't say anything? And funny, and that piece, the stigma of actually speaking about it, and also the little giggles, we have those. So we need to continue to speak about it, as Chauncey spoke about it, in the form of an actual medicine. that
If
heals
I just
people.
if I just get out, I think to what Cynthia said, the war on drugs has affected communities of color, marginalized community, in many different ways. And so, whether you have your nephew who got arrested, your son who's been in jail, a false arrest, all these other things. I think that the older generation can understand that side of it. In terms of just the stigma around the plant and the flower, I get it. There's been some things that are taboo, as when you talk to your grandmothers, the generational change is real. What I would say is, and we've come across this in our business, is that, look, cannabis is here and it will be in your neighborhood. And to Tito's point, look, the question really now for most people is going to be, there will be cannabis and there will be dispensaries in your neighborhood. Who is it that you want to be running those businesses? And you can decide that, and that's where the community voice should be heard. The stigma is there. I was talking to Chauncey before, if we treated this like coffee, it'd be a whole different conversation. But because it's cannabis, people look at the business different. And so we have to help do our part to destigmatize cannabis and make sure that people understand that, this is another opportunity, an opportunity of a lifetime, quite frankly, for a new emerging business in which people of color can take advantage of if we do this right.
Particularly the ones who've been most affected by the war on drugs, and
Yeah.
that's critical.
All right, so I'm going to do a quick round robin. Which, in a year, if we were sitting in these chairs a year from now, how many folks of color will have advanced to actually being operational in however they see themselves in the business from where we are now? What's your guess?
My number? Possibly, I say 20.
20. Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Sadly, I'd say 7.
I'd say probably 10 if we're lucky.
My initial reaction was 11.
11. Oh.
Yeah.
So actually that does demonstrate some optimism in a way that I wasn't expecting.
And put in perspective, there's 29
Yeah.
stores that are actually open in the state right now. And so I think we're actually kind of probably looking at, like, say if we
I
have
see.
another 29 next year,
Okay.
what percentage
But
of
we're
that?
also priority we're priority processing in the on a state level. So I do go around and I operate in different cities, and I see that there's a lot of push and a lot of acceptance for other economic empowerment applicants in other areas where they're more welcome,
Yeah.
as she spoke
So I
of.
could come back
like
here.
so,
One
wholly
quick
open.
thing. Between Boston,
get you to hold it.
Boston proper, Somerville, Cambridge, there should be 70 stores open. That's where my 10 came from. I think in those 3 municipalities,
Okay.
they have about
Yeah.
10 stores.
All right, we're going to leave it there. That's the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. And I want to thanks to all of my guests for joining us. Stay with us right now as we continue our conversation on Facebook Live and Twitter.
The heart